All right, thank you for joining us for our Recovery and Resiliency Roundtable here at the Georgia Chamber of Commerce. I'm Chris Clark, President and CEO of the Chamber, and this is a resource that we bring you each week to give you more insights into the economic recovery, how your business can learn, can grow, and quite frankly, lay a foundation for a more resilient future as we move through this recession and into the new Georgia economy. We've got a great discussion planned for you today, but before we jump into it, I want to give you a few updates on a totally different topic. I want to remind you that we do have a golf tournament scheduled for Monday. We've got a couple of spots open for that, and I know some of you really want to get outside right now, so please reach out to us, let us know, we'll see if we can get you out there with us. Our next roundtable coming up is September 2nd. It's on freight and logistics, an important issue for the state of Georgia, particularly as we move out of this recession. And then on September 9th, we're going to have the CEOs of our major utility companies in Georgia to talk about what's happened with the energy sector during the pandemic and what it's going to look like as we move out of it. We'll talk about Plant Vogtle. We'll also talk about solar energy in Georgia, and a really great discussion. And then I really want to encourage you to join us September 21st through the 24th for our Washington, D.C. fly-in. Senator Perdue, Loeffler, and a variety of members of our congressional delegation have all confirmed to be with us over those 4 days. We'll take about 2 hours a day over those 4 days to bring you the latest on recovery, resiliency. We'll also have deeper dives and discussions on the impact of Russia, China, and international partners around the world and what's happening globally. So a lot going on. I also want to encourage you to continue to go to our gachamber.com/COVID19.com webpage. Guys, we're giving you the latest updates from the CDC, from Governor Kemp, best practices. You can also find our unified standards information there about training for your employees to make sure that they're COVID ready and COVID prepared. And then lastly, I'm excited to tell you that please remind you that all of our roundtables and town halls are also available on our podcast that you can now get on Spotify and on Apple Podcast as well. So kind of interesting discussion today on the role of cybersecurity. And I'll tell you, when we talk about resiliency, this is the key sector, right? We know cybersecurity investment is going to grow by 70% over the next 3 to 4 years. A study of global CEOs just this weekend said they were asked, what are your top 3 concerns? What do you think are the 3 biggest risks for the economy as we move into 2021? They said lingering pandemic, environmental concerns, and cybersecurity. And just so you don't think it's all about the large companies, it impacts every small business, every church, every city, county government, and our hospitals every day. So today, to kind of give you a better insight of what your company can do and what the world looks like around cybersecurity, we have Bess Hinson, who's partner and chair of cybersecurity and privacy practice at Morris Manning Martin. We have Paul Farley, who is Deputy Chief Information Security Officer at our friends down the street here at NCR. And we have Amit Gandre, who's the Cybersecurity Managing Director at Deloitte. And I'll tell you, and I want to thank Deloitte. They have been critical partners for us in putting together our resiliency and recovery task force, helping manage that, and building out our agenda that we'll take to the Georgia General Assembly here over the next couple of months, giving them recommendations about how to help Georgia businesses and the Georgia economy thrive. So what I'd love to do is just jump in here and Bess, let you get us started. Give us your perspective on what the world looks like right now with cyber and what businesses need to be thinking about. And Bess, thanks for joining us.
Sure, it's great to be with you today, Chris. Over recent months, our Georgia companies, large and small, as well as professional firms, employees and consumers have increasingly relied on home networks, virtual workspaces, video conferencing, and all forms of remote work practices, which we have experienced in our day-to-day over the past several months. As a result of this shift for all of us, it has opened the door to new and increasing cybersecurity concerns. Phishing emails more than quadrupled in March of 2020, right as everyone was moving to remote work. And truly, these cyber criminals are using the outbreak and the shift to remote work to their advantage. Most recently, I have seen attacks mostly around ransomware, extortion threats, continued focus on accounts receivables departments, accounting departments, which we saw those attacks before, but it's really a sharp target for the cyber criminal to get in the middle of transactions and to get access to money, particularly if they get a hold of your data that's crucial to your business. As a part of the shift, we're also seeing the collection and creation of new repositories of data that did not exist before, right? Not only are we collecting more personal information about some of our employees, including their health status, right, which is sensitive information and can be protected under certain laws, depending on the context of its collection, but by virtue of needing to track the use of personal devices and our employees who are working remotely, it just makes cyber and data privacy best practices critically important during this time, and also going forward, as we do expect more of the workforce to remain at home in the coming years. At the beginning of the pandemic, we had several federal and state agencies issue warnings. We continue to see those alerts and warnings coming from federal and state agencies, including the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, other countries with whom we do business, such as the United Kingdom's National Cyber Security Center, have also issued alerts, sometimes in cooperation and jointly with DHS. So those are very important to stay on top of, particularly your security professionals in your organization should monitor those alerts. We've also seen individual state regulators issue specific notices to particular industries. So earlier this year, the New York Department of Financial Services, which regulates financial services companies that do business in New York, specifically requested that virtual currency businesses provide assurances of their plans to address and respond to COVID-19, including cybersecurity risks specific to COVID-19, which is quite unusual, right? You have an industry-specific regulator that says, hey, we really see a vulnerability here, if cyber criminals were to take advantage of the situation and steal virtual currency, for example. So that's just one example of that situation. We've also heard of guidance being issued by the SEC chairman, who has said that companies that are public should, in fact, provide investors with some insight into how cyber risk or their cyber risk profile might change as a result of the work from home situation and new attacks by cyber criminals who are trying to take advantage of our circumstances during the pandemic. So what are some steps that your business can take to address these concerns? I'm confident that my co-panelists will get into these best practices and recommendations as well, particularly as we work through the Q&A later on in our presentation. But there is a lot that your employees, a lot of information that your employees are processing right now, right? Not only are they trying to manage their home lives and childcare and keeping up with work, the last thing you may want to do or want to think about doing is, in fact, issuing new training, right, or reminders about phishing emails. You may think, well, should be a low priority on the totem pole of priorities at this time. I urge you to stay on top of your training and notifications sent to your employees to be aware. There are some unique challenges and risks that now present themselves because employees are working from home, and concerns that we've not always thought about when we've been able to manage our employees in one physical location, right? Keep in mind your accounting department employees are likely targets. Those are the ones whose password credentials have to be changed frequently. You should be sort of logging access to their accounts to make sure that you understand whether or not authorizations or logins to their accounts have been authorized or coming from an authorized location, right? One of the some of the evidence that we look at when there is in fact unauthorized access or there's been an attack, right, is looking at the traffic, the logins, the IP addresses, where are they from, right? Did our accounting professional log in from Atlanta, Georgia, where she might have her home, or did this accounting professional log in from another country, right? Which is probably going to be suspect because no one's traveling right now, or fewer people are traveling, and your employee certainly is not. And so that's very important to keep track of monitoring the credentials and various logins. The other thing I'd advise you of is to encourage employees to turn off their smart speakers, advise them not to download or transfer company information to personal devices. You know, if the internet goes down at their home, they might be tempted to take a document they were working on and send it through their personal email. Encourage them not to do that. Prohibit that, block access to their email when they're logged into the VPN if possible. Let them know they should not be utilizing third-party cloud storage options unless that's a part of your policy. I would hope it's not, but you want to be able to remind them that they should not be using personal accounts at home. Continue to advise them not to keep information that's unnecessary, right? So if you have employees that answer calls from customers and a customer might be giving them some personal information or sensitive personal information that ordinarily you might have control over how that employee discards that information at the end of the workday, right? If they're taking notes at home and they have some sensitive personal information written down, you need to advise them on best practices to destroy that information in their home office, in their home workplace. So other than that, I know I'm probably going past my time here for introductory remarks. I've worked with a lot of companies who are responding to security incidents right now. Managing a security incident requires input from your security team, your IT professionals, your leadership. And oftentimes the management of that incident can take place or has taken place in the past at your physical workplace. Now we're trying to manage these high stress crisis situations remotely, and it presents new challenges. And so just as we all had to figure out the plan of how to work from home when we moved to a more remote workplace earlier this year, think about how you would operate if you were to have a security incident. Do you have the phone number to call? Do you have the experts lined up that you would need? Do you know if they're available? How would you work remotely? You know, my experience is, of course, through calls and Zoom and other video conferencing methods, but try and think about that beforehand, before you have a critical security incident during this time period.
Cool. Thank you, Bess. I appreciate that. We covered a lot right there, but I think it's unique that the perspective you bring to this obviously is providing legal advice and helping lots of different companies do it. I do have a legal question for you in a minute, but I want to go into Paul right now, who's looking at it from kind of that corporate infrastructure standpoint, and you're looking at it a little bit differently than what Bess is doing. So, Paul, tell us what you're seeing and how NCR's responded and what the world of cybersecurity looks like right now to you.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Thank you, Chris. And I agree with a lot of what Beth threw out there, and I'm sure we'll dig into that in the Q&A. And I'm really going to take this from two perspectives, both as a cybersecurity practitioner, as well as to tell people a little bit about NCR, because it's really relevant how we faced in the pandemic. Now, a lot of people think they know NCR. We've been around for 130-something years, and so they say, isn't that National Cash Register? Don't you make cash registers? The answer is we do. We now call them point of sales. But really, our job is to keep customers running. And we're digital first, but not digital only. So we have software and hardware and services that stitch all that together. And so significant portions of our business are as a service based and had already kind of gone through that digital transformation. And then other portions are very much about shipping equipment or delivering something to a customer physically. And so when this happened, we found two things. We went through the same things that every company has had to go through of how do we distribute office workers that work predominantly from a PC or laptop to their homes, which in some ways was the easy solution. And then we also have engineering staff that work with physical gear that are building things, and we had to make arrangements for them to have access to a lab or to put labs in people's homes. So technically that was a little bit more complicated. But where we really saw the opportunities, that's on the NCR company operation, where we really saw the opportunity was to do outreach to our customers to help them, because as we've seen the explosion of ordering a menu from your phone or the delivery apps, either a particular restaurant's own application or one of the delivery services, NCR has a lot of middleware that's behind those applications, either the entire application or the application interfaces somewhere along the line for NCR to facilitate that transaction. And so it really accelerated our company's need to help our customers ensure they could operate or give them a new operating model. We had a lot of contact with restaurants, for instance, that had never had an app before, never needed an app before, and all of a sudden now they really needed one so that they could do delivery or people could do curbside pickup. So it's changed some business models, and I'm proud to say that NCR has been able to come alongside our customers and help them with that. Because at the end of the day, we want to make transaction as simple as possible for our customers. That's kind of a tagline over everything is we're trying to make the simple possible. And so NCR is headquartered here in Atlanta. We're proud to say we have about 45,000 employees, and we operate in 160 countries globally. So we have a pretty big footprint, and so when this happened, we had to be very thoughtful on how to scale some of the solutions. As we've taken care of our employees and we've looked, so I'll pivot a little bit more to the cyber specific stuff. What this is really driven is a need to go into the home with cyber recommendations. So things like most people would assume that you should have a router of some sort, some device in your home that all of your computers are behind. Well, not everybody knows that. Globally, not everybody knows that. Some people take a connection that comes right from their landlord and plug it in, and that could be very safe, or that could be directly connected to the internet. So some of the security awareness that Bess was talking about how people need to be thoughtful in their home, you really need to do that. You need to help people understand their part, because that's the wedge that criminals and their ilk are trying to leverage. And we have seen a massive increase in phishing, which of course is an email trying to get you to disclose information or install something on your machine unbeknownst to you, looking like something else. And huge volume. Our tools are handling it well. Our security tools, thankfully, are not passing all of that volume through. They're stopping that. But as with any crisis or kind of world event, criminals take advantage of lures that are topical. So right now, COVID or vaccines, or where to find a COVID test, or the latest regulation or really anything you see in the news is fair game. And Bess alluded to it a little bit. Some of the processes that you have that people have really relied on being physically present to where they could look to somebody else and say, hey, does this look right to you? There's a breakdown. That's harder. They have to, they can't just ask the person at the desk next to them. And so you really need to help them understand what resources inside your company can they reach out to for questions, and encourage them to do so, even if it's a dumb question, right? If I could count the number of dumb questions that have turned out to be a real security issue, I don't think I can count that high. So, you really need to encourage them and educate them. They want to do the right thing. Many times they just don't know how. Some companies have had an easier time going to a remote model because they are heavy users of cloud services, whether, cloud security controls that they are easily scaled. Companies that have been very dependent on all of the infrastructure for their IT infrastructures in their office have been more challenged with this because that involves ordering more servers or appliances or gear that has to be installed, purchasing more licenses. So I think we've seen really a rush to some folks who maybe were holding back on going to the cloud and going to some of these software as a service offerings have been forced that way and are now reimagining how they do their IT operations. And the last thing I'll point out that I feel like I'd be remiss if I didn't is a lot of companies, especially small companies, are getting hit because they didn't have, that they issued employees desktops, for instance, and not laptops. So when they sent everybody home, they said, well, use the PC that you have at home and connect back into the company to do your work. And sometimes some of that is not well thought through from a security control perspective. And that's opened up avenues that criminals can get into the systems at the office that are sitting there waiting for connections from the internet, and that's caused problems. So if your company is struggling with that or needs help with that, there's a lot of folks out there that can do it. Please reach out and get professional assistance with that. So with that, I'll pass it back to you, Chris.
Thanks, Paul. I appreciate it. And I really appreciate the support that you guys have given for the hospitality industry that's struggled so much over the last few months. And it's remarkable. It didn't even occur to me. So last night, my wife and I, yesterday afternoon, stopped by to have appetizers and a cocktail at a new restaurant that opened. And we sat down, there was a QR code on the table. And we're like, where are our menus? And the waiter said, you use your phone, take a picture, and there's the menu. And he goes, it saves us. It's healthier, right? But also he says our menu updates, our beer list updates, our wine list, we don't have to print stuff out over the time. So in the long term, it's saving them money, but also allows them to be more responsive. So thank you guys for your help in that area.
It's our pleasure. We're here for our customers.
Absolutely. So Amit, so you're helping companies all over the world try to maneuver through this pandemic. So now, if NCR is not a client, I'm sure they're on the target list. So I'm curious, what are you what are you hearing from your clients right now? What advice are you giving them?
Absolutely, Chris. So first of all, good morning, everyone, and great discussion thus far on things that we are seeing in the future of cyber. Before I begin, Chris, many thanks to you and the Georgia Chamber of Commerce for organizing this event. I believe it is imperative that we continue to have more discussions on the topic of cybersecurity and use forums such as these to raise awareness on cyber. So thank you for doing this. Paul and Bess covered some very interesting points, and I just want to build up upon that conversation. Going with the theme of today's discussion, one thing that we are seeing quite a bit now, given all the lessons learned with the pandemic, is a focus on cyber resiliency. If I go back to some of these survey studies that we've done in the past, Deloitte NASIO cybersecurity study as an example, and also some of the recent conversations with state CISOs, we have seen that, always seen that securing a healthy cyber budget continues to be a challenge even today. And other areas of concern from the study include cyber talent and increased sophistication of cyber attacks. So all of this matters because, you know, we have experienced a number of these challenges result in difficulties in actually implementing appropriate cyber controls during the time of the pandemic. But as we think forward, right, as post-pandemic recovery measures ramp up, we also feel that cyber leaders are presented with an opportunity to strategize and collaborate with business stakeholders to have security built in their future plans opposed to an afterthought. So the challenge of having a cyber budget to not handle things can be solved, or at least the right steps can be taken in the future, given all the lessons learned that we have. It's also an excellent chance to demonstrate that security is an enabling function and must have for a resilient organization. One thing I believe organizations can do is, especially the cyber leaders, is work with business stakeholders more. Communicate that cyber resilience is not a destination, but also a journey that will require continuous maturity and innovation. And to be a resilient organization, the real requirement is to move away from a checklist-based approach, which we have seen in the past happen with cyber, to more critical thinking on security. And the answers to which will influence future decisions for us. To guide a conversation around cyber resiliency, what we recommend is to break it really down into 3 parts. One is respond, recover, and then thrive. What we have seen is, obviously, many organizations have been focused on responding to what the pandemic has done from a cyber perspective. They've been focused on stopping the bleeding. Examples include, as Paul and Bess mentioned, several rapid adoptions of cyber capabilities, such as MFA as a service or endpoint protection capabilities have been taken into consideration. There has also been a rapid adoption of cloud workloads to address scaling requirements. But as we move away from the phase of responding to recovery, we are no longer reacting, but in fact reinventing. We are moving away from an unpredictable state, which we are in, to an interim normal state. And we are moving away from a contingency planning to a scenario planning situation. And then finally, thriving gets us to a point of answering what the next normal should be and what cyber capabilities will improve our defenses against future cyber attacks in the next new normal. So it's important for our cyber leaders to start thinking that way so that they're able to acquire the necessary support for cyber going forward and are more aligned with the business. A couple of examples that I have seen in my interactions with my clients in this space that I think would require a little bit more attention as future strategies are defined. One is a focus on organizational boundaries. Without a doubt, the widespread scramble to accommodate remote work has increased the attack surface to unprecedented proportions. And if you think about an organization's boundary now, it expands beyond the known infrastructure boundaries to personal workspaces of employees, staff as they work remotely. And that's where privacy also comes into play, right? We have to figure out how we're going to secure those extended boundaries without stepping over people's personal privacy concerns. In addition, in the face of the pandemic, many organizations have had to onboard contractors, third-party organizations to provide additional support, further expanding access to organizational resources, thereby expanding the boundaries. So one thing I would recommend as as folks look at the future is what does the new boundary look like? And that is probably one of the most foundational steps to consider in a future state strategy. And then I believe Bess alluded to the fact that attention to the operations model is important, the cyber operations model, right? If you think about it, there are several questions that come to mind here as we start thinking about what the future state operate model would look like. Does the cyber operate model scale with an expanded organizational footprint, right? Are your security operation capabilities distributed enough? Locations, service providers to support you in the time of a crisis? And how rapidly does your model scale to changing demands? And this last point, how rapidly, is extremely important because we saw the need for more vigilance, more resilience in cyber as the boundaries changed. And then finally on operating models, if there is a heavy reliance on third parties, right? Are those third parties really capable of supporting you in the time of a crisis? So all of these matter as folks start thinking about the future of cyber and really looking at their the cyber plans and strategy for the future. And the last but not least is really cyber talent, right? One of the biggest things from an impact perspective has happened here is that there is a change to the social contract that we have, that social contract during the pandemic, really. The assumptions around way things are have changed, and that social contract has been rewritten. For example, in the future, remote work may be more productive for the organization and more desirable for employees. And honestly, the standard of how, where, and when we work is changing. So this is one area that cyber leaders need to start thinking about more on how are they going to continue to build cyber talent and accommodate the new changes with the new social contract as they plan for the future. So, you know, these are some of the things that we have seen, Chris, and in summary, I really think now is the time if cyber leaders want to change the game on cyber, align better with business, and thrive in the next new normal. These are just a few things that have to be done.
Thanks, Amit. I appreciate it. I want to start with you with a question. I'm going to ask, I'll go Paul and then Bess, and then I want to ask all of you, and I'll go ahead and give you a tip off of the last question, which will be, from a policy standpoint, are there things that we could advocate at the federal or the state level to make us more supportive of businesses and to be more cyber secure? So that'll be my last question. But Amit, you mentioned the talent issue here, and I'm more curious. We've had a lot of conversations in the last year and a half on the incredible growth and demand for cyber professionals as a growing sector. We've seen some high schools in Georgia actually implement programs where these kids that might have dropped out, they're D students, they literally are graduating with 100% job security from moving into cybersecurity because they've got their credentials at that level. Tell me what you see as what the talent pipeline looks like, what the needs are, what could we be doing to make sure more people are going into this field?
Yeah, I think the need is there, right? And unfortunately, the headline is that there is not enough cyber professionals out there. You know, to solve this problem, it's a difficult one to solve, but you know, it requires some investment, right? And it requires responsible organizations really to be willing to invest in building a community of cyber professionals while acknowledging my points before, which is changing to the social contract that's happening in parallel. So, you know, in addition to that, I think collaborating with other, from a cybersecurity community perspective, is also important to continue to grow that talent, right? It's no longer about, well, here's the best resume out there, right? It's about getting to the people, making sure that we grow and groom people along the way to make sure that they're capable of delivering to the cyber needs. So it requires quite a bit of investment. As an example, you know, at Deloitte, we do a lot of trainings at the local high school level, college level, and we participate in the community. And what we have seen is a good amount of success with getting more people interested in the topic of cyber and then making that as a career path. Another thing I would say is, the use of perhaps cognitive technologies in combination with cybersecurity professionals. So the point there is, how can we better automate certain aspects of cyber while, getting professionals or talent more focused on things that require more strategic thinking. And I think, areas such as, with the cloud adoption, some of that is happening. However, we still have some room for improvement, and that just requires a little bit more thought towards innovation and how we can accomplish that with some, in parallel with grooming cyber professionals.
That's great. Thank you, Amit. Let's switch gears. Paul, it struck me as you were talking about your clients and your customers that so many of them are small businesses, right? And a lot of them don't think I'm a small business, nobody's going to bother me. I just asked my IT guy, we had 4,000 threats last month here at the Georgia Chamber. And I remember a program we did last year where we brought in some cyber folks to meet with small businesses. And and the questions were as basic as, should I change my passwords more than once a year? So if I'm a small business person or even a nonprofit and I don't have access to all the support networks and the resources that a large company does, how can I even protect my customer data? I mean, what are the basics for us? I mean, we've talked about some general stuff with our staff, but I'm curious, what advice do you have? I mean, who's out there to help these small businesses and what can they do?
Yeah, that's a great question, Chris, and I know a lot of folks struggle with it, and I actually think it ties into the talent pipeline question of, a lot of us, I'm not going to say that I'm old, but a lot of us that came up before this was a really well-defined space, there wasn't a straight track into cyber. We were, might have just been the person that was standing there that was like, here, go figure this out. I don't know what this means. And, that's very much the experience in small and mid-sized businesses is somebody with an aptitude is probably going to be the point person. It could be anywhere from the administrative assistant to, that intern that seemed to have a knack for computer stuff that got hired part-time. There are a number of companies that provide virtual CISO services, and I would really encourage looking at that because you get somebody who has experience and understands kind of the full gamut of the cybersecurity space, kind of on a fractional basis. So that's one thing to look at from a leadership, because it is hard to know who to believe. People knock on my door all day long telling me that their solution really is going to fix this problem. And, it's people, process, and technology. It always has been and always will be. And there's always something else around the corner. Most of the things that people need to do to be secure, that they already know, they just don't know if they know it. And I would draw the analogy to, for those that are parents, if you think about, do you teach your children not to get in a stranger's car or to be aware when they're walking down the street and maybe don't take the shortcut through the dark alley? All of those are risk decisions. Those are giving them clues on how to pay attention to things, how to be aware. And if something doesn't seem right, then it probably isn't right. And be careful, get help. If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. I would say a few things. So aside from just that general awareness, I would say every single place that you have the capability to turn on multi-factor authentication, or sometimes people will say dual-factor authentication, do that. Most email providers offer that. And that's where you use your password and something else to log in. That stops a tremendous amount. The length of passwords is more important than the complexity. So if you have a sentence, it can have spaces in it. It can be, you know, I love the Georgia Chamber, right? Period. That is a much stronger password than an 8-character thing that you have a hard time remembering, and every time you go to type it, you think, oh, not again. Get a password safe. You know, there's a number of consumer products out there that provide this, and then you can generate a password for every single site you need and not repeat them. A huge challenge, and something that I'm not going to ask for people to raise their hands, but I bet the majority of people would raise their hands that they share the same password, or at least a big portion of that, across a lot of the sites they use on the internet. And that really, really is dangerous, because if you look at the sites on the internet that are the most popular, there's about 20 that everybody goes to in some form or fashion. And so what the criminals do is, if they get a password, they take it and they throw it against those 20 sites. They have a pretty good shot of getting a number of successful compromises. And if they get into your email, they can reset passwords for your company, for your bank, for, I mean, everything, right? So really important. Turn on that multi-factor authentication so that it's not just on your password. Make your password a little bit longer. Don't share your password between the sites. And then pay attention. If somebody's calling you or sending you an email and what they say doesn't sound true, say, hey, what's the number I can call you back? Or go look up in a trusted directory that organization's number and call their main number back before you interact with them. These are the kind of things that, you know, or go to somebody that you know. Everybody has a friend or family who is in cybersecurity nowadays, it seems. Ask them. They'll tell you some similar things maybe that are relevant to your particular situation. Most people in this business that I know are very passionate about it and really want to help educate.
Thank you, Paul. That was a lot of great information. I was taking notes here about changing my passwords. And the other thing, too, is to change your passwords more frequently, too, right? Update them and don't let them get stale. Bess, I've had several people text me literally while we're talking, and they all want me to ask you this question in some form or another, to put your legal hat on for a minute. You know, if you are attacked and you don't have the right protocols in place and somebody steals your customer data, they steal your customers, you know, financial information, what does that look like from a legal consideration? I mean, what kind of legal issues are out there that folks need to be worried about that they might not even realize that they're, you know, they're open to?
Sure. So there are a variety of legal issues. You know, to start with, if you're a service provider business, meaning that you're offering services to other enterprise businesses, you're B2B as opposed to B2C, right? You have a contract, right, with your customers. And within that contract, you have likely made certain representations regarding how you will secure information that is entrusted to you about that other business, right? And so one of the things I would be very concerned about, this is probably advice for more mid-sized to smaller businesses, is do you have information about your customers' businesses backed up, right? Do you have copies of it? Are you backing it up? That issue of backup is one that's sometimes expensive for businesses, right, to have copies. But if you were subject to a ransomware attack, or if your data were held hostage, right, how would you continue to provide services to your customers if you weren't able to access that data? That's an issue that's very important. Other issues that are of concern outside of your contractual agreement with your customer is there are separate obligations, both here in the state of Georgia and other states as well, which relate to any data security incident that results in unauthorized access or acquisition to protected personal information. Now, I say protected personal information or personal information, it's a legal term of art. It's a certain subset of data that we hold either about individuals, about our customers, that different states have said, these are the crown jewels. If a threat actor gets a hold of those, then you, business, have regulatory obligations to notify the individuals who were impacted, right? And so what I'm talking about is what we all fear, the big data breach, which we read about in the news, and we have to then provide identity theft monitoring to affected individuals or persons, right? So one of the points I want to make on this call is that when an event like that occurs, such that you have payment card information of your customers or other individuals that is compromised, when you have social security numbers of your employees. I mean, think about your HR team, your accounting department. If they have likely bank account information somewhere, hopefully in an encrypted form, but they might have, input direct deposit information about your employees into a third party software that you're utilizing to pay your employees, right? Make sure that your HR professional or accounting professional who has access to that information has deleted it from their inbox, or that it's in an encrypted form, that it's not lingering anywhere that could be accessed by a threat actor, right? Because one type of data breach or data security incident that can occur is one that not only impacts your customers, but one that impacts your employees. And it would be terrible right now to have an incident that impacts your employees, or, God forbid that, we're still in this situation and money has been stolen from them, or their paychecks are rerouted to another bank account, right? Because a fraudster got a hold of that direct deposit information, which that happens. But you would have obligations vis-a-vis your employees as well under these state laws, depending upon where your employees sit. So I hope that's helpful, but the point I want to make is that when you have breaches or security incidents that touch that protected information, there are certain steps that you have to go through in order to address your regulatory notification obligations. One, I'd recommend you need to call a lawyer because any investigation that you carry out, ideally, all steps, all actions, as soon as you discover there might be an incident, would be covered under the attorney-client privilege. I recognize that some of you may not be able to engage a lawyer for that purpose, but if you're going to have to engage a lawyer down the road, go ahead and engage them up front just so you can have the work product that's produced from the investigation and conversations about that incident covered under the privilege. You may have to hire a third party to conduct a computer forensic investigation to determine exactly how that threat actor got in, what they had access to. Usually early on, when you discover an incident, you don't know exactly what data or personal information that threat actor gained access to or acquired as a result of that incident. Sometimes we have to go through documents and look at them and say, oh, well, in this employee's inbox, they perform a role where we thought they wouldn't have any protected personal information, but in fact they do. Or they scanned their passport and emailed it to themselves, right? Which is not a good government identifier to have in a compromised email inbox, right? But that would require notice. And so those computer forensic investigations get to be very expensive, and then you potentially have to notify parties or announce this publicly. The point being, right now is not a good time to have to spend tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars on a cybersecurity incident. So think about having in place a cyber liability insurance policy if you do not have one. These are becoming more affordable and accessible to smaller and medium-sized businesses. Oftentimes you can add them to business insurance you already have in place. Other larger, more sophisticated, mature companies and businesses obviously need more coverage, but that's something to think about because the cost for the services I just identified, including the cost for a lawyer like myself, can be covered by those policies.
That's great advice too. We just did that here at the Georgia Chamber this year, and I was worried about how much it was going to cost us, and it was such a small amount of money for what the benefit has been. And so that's great advice. All right, we've really gone over time, but I really want to give you all, 30, 60 seconds here. If you were governor for the day or a legislator or a king for the day or president, what policy change would you do to help us be more cyber secure? Bess, I'll start with you, go to Paul, and then end with Amit.
Sure. So I think there is a big misunderstanding or misconception about cyber attacks that's out there. We need to start at the premise that cybersecurity is really a national security issue. More likely than not, an attack that an American business experiences or a Georgia business experiences is from sort of an organized criminal group of cyber attackers that is located outside of the United States, right? This is an issue that the FBI and other government agencies are very focused on. Other countries and criminals are looking to gain access to American wealth, right? And so our policymakers need to understand that. And in my view, pass legislation that incentivizes businesses to proactively implement cybersecurity controls, policies, and procedures in such a way that, it might seem like a burden initially to our businesses, but if we can rely upon that to help protect the information and the money that our businesses are earning, right? And also use that to defend ourselves as businesses in the event that we have an attack that's coming from another country or from an organized criminal ring, that would really help us, right, to get where we need to be in terms of our maturity level when we think about cybersecurity and investing in the infrastructure that it will in fact require of our businesses.
That's a great recommendation. Thank you, Bess. I made a note. That's going on our agenda. Paul, what about you?
So a couple things. I'll make 2 points. One, the vast majority of breaches start with email. So if you had to pay attention to one area, pay really close attention to email because upwards of 90% of security incidents start with email that lands. So, and they're hard. That's not a judgment of people that click, but this is really an area to put some focus on. The other is if you're a victim of wire fraud or you wire some money somewhere, there is a way that can be clawed back. And you actually, I want to put this out here because a lot of people don't know, you can go to the Internet Crime Complaint Center, IC3.gov, and kick off the process. And a lot of times they can stop that before it gets all the way through the financial system and get your money back. I have a nonprofit that I'm a member of that recently got hit by this. And the person was embarrassed that they got tricked, and so they didn't tell us for 30 days. If they could have gotten to us within about the first 48 hours or so, high likelihood we could have stopped it and gotten it back, unfortunately. So those are two just, and then as to the question about, the public-private partnership, there's organizations currently that seek to foster this relationship. I think one area we do need a national data privacy law. Right now we have a patchwork of laws across the nation, and it really makes it challenging and quite burdensome to figure out how do you stay in compliance with that? How do you ensure that you're aligned with the right statutes? I'm not a lawyer, but I am the primary incident responder for my company, and so this is a constant conversation of, okay, what applies here? What do we have to worry about? And so I think there's good intentions on all sides to do this. There's some differences in maybe how we should approach it. And we can't let the government do this by themselves, because as well-meaning as they are, they have a completely different lens that they are looking through than the private sector. So we really have to come alongside and do this together in a public-private partnership.
Great advice, Paul. Thank you. Amit, thank you for being with us today. What's your recommendation?
Yeah, I think, Chris, think about it, right? The cyber community really needs to be a little bit more coordinated to be better prepared to fight cyber attacks, right? Cyber attacks are getting more sophisticated, and I think they are a little bit more coordinated than we are. And I think, my experience is that with cyber incidents that we see, a lot of the things come down to certain basics, right? And there is not enough funding to address some of the basic cyber related controls that need to be in. So, my advice would be in that case is policymakers start thinking about how to make cyber funding more accessible. We can't wait, right? We have to be a little bit more agile in the way we distribute that funding. And maybe an idea could be that it is a mandate that as organizations put in a request for business funding for business transformation, cyber is simply built in, right? It is not a nice to have anymore, it has to be a must have. So I would encourage thinking in that direction, because then it becomes part of the solution and not perceived as a problem.
That's great, Emmett. Thank you so much. Thank all of you guys, Deloitte, Morris Manning, NCR. You guys are all great members of ours. We appreciate what you do in the state of Georgia, how much you help Georgia businesses. I want to remind everybody on our virtual call that we'll reconvene on September 2nd for a discussion on freight and logistics. Our DC fly-in is September 21st through the 24th. You can join us on our YouTube channel, visit our website, or download our new podcast, and continue to do all that you can to help Georgia grow, and send us your suggestions, your needs. Reach out to us for anything that you need at all here at the Georgia Chamber.